They say that history is written by the victors, but what if part of it had been erased, hidden, buried in silence, never meant to be revealed again? What if, behind the solemn face of the 16th President of the United States, there lay a truth too dark to be accepted in school books? Abraham Lincoln is remembered as the liberator of the enslaved, the man who held the Union together in the midst of the nation's bloodiest war. But could he also have been a hunter of vampires? This hypothesis, which sounds as though it had stepped straight out of a Gothic novel, gains weight when one delves into the darker corners of Lincoln's life. Historian William H. Herndon, his own biographer and close friend, recorded in Herndon's Lincoln, The True Story of a Great Life, published in the year 1889, that Lincoln grew up surrounded by stories of superstition and death. While still young, he witnessed his mother, Nancy Hanks, die under mysterious circumstances of an illness known as milk sickness, a disease caused by contaminated milk from cows that fed on poisonous plants. Yet, many neighbors in rural Kentucky swore that her death had not been natural. There were whispers of a night visitor, of a strange presence that lingered around the cabin before she passed away. Like any legend, this tale blurs with the official history. Still, Lincoln never forgot that tragedy. In a letter preserved within the archives of the Library of Congress, he wrote, "The deepest pain of youth shapes the destiny of the man." Words that echo as though they carried a silent vow. Had he sworn vengeance against something society dared not even name? Here lies the first piece of a far greater puzzle: a childhood marked by loss, a youth shadowed by darkness, and a future president who would confront not only the masters of slavery, but something far terrible, a hidden empire that fed upon human blood. But how could these two worlds, the realm of politics and the realm of myth, ever intertwine? And to what extent did the scars of Lincoln's childhood shape the man who would become the hunter? The death of Nancy Hanks Lincoln, mother of the future president, never ceased to be an enigma. Historians explain it through the milk sickness, yet in the rural communities of Kentucky there persisted a belief. Certain deaths were not caused by poison, but rather by the visit of the so-called wasting ones, entities that drained vitality until all that remained was a frail body stripped of strength to live. Decades later, folklorists would recognize in those tales the echoes of vampiric traditions brought by immigrants from Central Europe. Lincoln, still a boy, watched his mother's suffering until her final breath. Witnesses claimed that he seldom wept, but instead carried his grief in silence. His cousin, Dennis Hanks, would state in interviews published in Century magazine in the year 1887, that boy had a different look, as though he bore a rage greater than his years. Was it merely the sorrow of a child, or the first sign of a silent vow against dark forces? It is at this point that legend begins to blend with reality. Some versions, preserved within family diaries, mention that after the burial the young Lincoln declared, "If ever evil claimed my mother, I promise it shall never claim another." No official document confirms those words, yet the oral tradition of the region has carried that promise to this very day. Fate seemed to shape that boy for something greater. In the years that followed, Lincoln immersed himself in books as though searching for hidden answers within the pages. He studied law and politics, but he also turned the leaves of theological texts and accounts of ancient legends. One of the volumes that may have fallen into his hands was The Mysteries of Nature and Art by John Bate, a work popular in the 19th century, describing everything from mechanical inventions to the secrets of the night. It would not have been impossible for him to have encountered there descriptions of beings that fed upon blood. They say that youth is the place where personal myths are forged. For Lincoln, every memory of his lost mother seemed to rekindle a flame. It was not enough simply to survive. one had to fight against something concealed beneath the surface of American society. And it was precisely when he grew into manhood and entered the realm of politics that his path began to intertwine with a far more tangible enemy. In the 19th century, the United States was divided not only by political ideologies, but by something far deeper, an economy built upon slavery. Entire plantations prospered at the cost of the blood and sweat of men and women reduced to mere merchandise. And here, the legend of the vampire emerges once again. Abolitionist writers of the time went so far as to describe slaveholders as life drainers, a metaphor that many believe concealed something more than rhetoric. In the year 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, a work that denounced the brutality of slavery. In one passage, she describes the system as an open mouth that devours the life of thousands. For some readers, the metaphor was purely social. But others swore that Stowe was giving voice to rumors of a dark aristocracy, powerful families who fed quite literally upon the blood of the enslaved. It is within this landscape that the figure of Abraham Lincoln takes on an almost mythical shape. Even in the early years of his political career, his speeches carried a strange energy, as though he spoke not only against the men who upheld slavery, but against something unseen that stood behind them. In a letter written in the year 1855 to his friend Joshua Speed, Lincoln declared, "I cannot but hate. I hate slavery because it deprives our fellow men of their labor, their dignity, and their very essence of life." Words which, when read through the lens of myth, resound as a direct attack on a parasitism older than the Republic itself. According to the oral tradition nourished by this legend, the Civil War was not merely a clash between North and South, but an attempt to dismantle the true empire of the vampires, sustained by human flesh. The battlefields, already soaked with blood, became as well the stage of a hidden war between the president and forces that sought to perpetuate slavery not merely as an economy, but as a source of nourishment and power. And thus arises the great question. Was Lincoln only a political leader guided by moral conviction, or a silent warrior waging the oldest of wars? The legacy of that struggle drew near its climax, but when the war came to its end, had the darkness truly been defeated? The Civil War came to an end in the year 1865, and slavery, at least upon paper, was abolished. The Union seemed restored, and Abraham Lincoln appeared as the great architect of a new future for the United States. But the victory was brief, almost illusory. Only days after the surrender of the South, he was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington. The official history points to John Wilkes Booth, an actor sympathetic to the Confederate cause, as the man who fired the fatal shot. Yet within the darker tradition, this crime was seen in another light, not as a simple political act, but as the vengeance of an empire that refused to die. Accounts of the time, such as those of Gideon Welles, Lincoln's Secretary of the Navy, describe the atmosphere of the city after the assassination as heavy, suffocating, seized by an almost supernatural silence. Was it merely the grief of a mourning nation, or something more, as though the shadow Lincoln had fought had at last claimed its victory? For many, his death represented more than the loss of a president. It was the breaking of a bond. He had kept the Union united, but also, according to legend, had held back the darkness that lurked behind slavery. The question that echoes ever since is inevitable. Did Lincoln's fall leave the path open for that darkness to survive in silence, adapting itself to new times and new forms of power? Historians see in him a human leader with both faults and virtues, yet the mythic tradition portrays him as a silent warrior, one who sacrificed his very life not only for freedom, but for the soul of the nation itself. And perhaps both versions do not contradict one another. For it is not rare that humanity's greatest heroes are remembered as more than men, as guardians against that which must never be forgotten. And so arises the doubt, did Lincoln's War end in the year 1865, or did it merely change its shape, continuing in the shadows even to this day? If this story has awakened your curiosity, subscribe to the channel and follow the next videos, because if there exists a hidden legacy of blood and shadows within the history of humankind, perhaps you must come to know it before it comes to know you.